I knew something was off the moment the COO's face flickered onto the screen. Too smooth, too smug, like he just watched himself fire someone in the mirror, and liked the way he looked doing it. Marcus Holt, fresh off the Silicon Valley assembly line of buzzwords and equity dilution, wearing a Patagonia vest over a shirt that probably cost more than my first car. He cleared his throat, smiled, and said the sentence that would define the quarter. We're cutting bonuses for non-essential staff. My stomach didn't drop. My hands didn't shake. I just took a slow sip from the chipped gray mug I'd used every day for 12 years. The one with the faded company logo and a crack down the handle like a stress fracture nobody bothered fixing, kind of like the company itself now that I think about it. I was in that Zoom room, camera off, microphone muted, watching a dozen little boxes go still. Some execs blinked hard. Others turned their heads slightly, as if they'd misheard. The VP of People turned to stone. One junior manager mouthed WTF and hit send. Probably to a group chat I was long excluded from. I didn't say a word. Just leaned over, opened the bottom drawer of my file cabinet, and pulled out a folder with my name scrawled across the top in red Sharpie. I slid out one page, just one, and laid it gently on the desk. My signature. Their signature. Dated, notarized, and quietly tucked away in the aftermath of the 2013 merger. When nobody was watching the contracts because everyone was trying to save their own skin. And right now, before we get too deep into this mess, I'll just say this: if you're listening and 97% of you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, go ahead and tap it. It helps our team more than you know. And if you're into corporate karma and executive faceplants, trust me, it gets better from here. Like the video too, unless you're Marcus. Back on the call, Marcus kept talking like he was auditioning for a LinkedIn keynote. This move ensures operational efficiency while aligning incentives with core value contributors. Translation: we don't see you. We don't care. You're not expensive enough to matter or cheap enough to keep. The word that stood out was non-essential. That's the one that made a few heads tilt like dogs hearing a microwave beep. Because once you throw that word into a company-wide announcement, you're no longer reorganizing. You're labeling. You're drawing lines in fluorescent highlighter between the people you think built this place and the ones you think are just taking up oxygen. I clicked out of the Zoom, printed a fresh copy of that clause just for dramatic flair, and placed it in a new envelope. One I'd addressed weeks ago. No one noticed. They never do until it's too late. Because the thing about being non-essential is that it only sounds true until the lights go out, and you realize the person they fired was the one who knew where the breaker was. 2 days after the Zoom bloodletting, Marcus strutted into the office like he just conquered Rome with a spreadsheet. He didn't even have the decency to pretend this was a reorg. It was a purge with branding. Legacy roles were being sunset, efficiency pods were being formed, and suddenly a 24-year-old with a title like VP of Strategic Velocity was explaining to my direct reports how to do the jobs they'd done since before he had chest hair. My team, hell, my people, got chopped up like clearance meat, carved into silos with brand new acronyms slapped on them, like renaming a dumpster fire makes it a startup. Cheryl, my longest tenured analyst, got reassigned to Data Catalyst Growth Vector. She called me afterward, voice shaking, asking if she needed to bring her own laptop to the onboarding Zoom because the new director hadn't added her to the system. Jake, our in-house numbers guy and the closest thing we had to a human calculator, got lumped into something called Finance Flex, which sounded more like a protein shake than a department. The kid leading it asked him to translate spreadsheets into story-driven narratives. Marcus didn't look me in the eye once during the all-hands that week. Not when he announced that strategic redundancies were being addressed. Not when he flashed a flowchart that looked like a bowl of spaghetti if half the noodles had LinkedIn profiles, and certainly not when I sat there silent while my entire team was gutted and glued back together with jargon. Friday came. HR put a 15-minute meeting on my calendar titled Transition Planning. No emotion. No hint. Just a digital guillotine with Outlook notifications. I walked in, nodded at Sandra from HR, who looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight, and took a seat. Marcus was already there, tapping his iPad like he had somewhere important to be. "We're eliminating your position, effective immediately," he said without looking up. No performance critique. No misconduct. Just corporate euthanasia by buzzword. I waited a beat. Let the silence spread like smoke. "Understood," I said, voice steady. "Please send the termination packet to my counsel." Marcus looked up then. just for a second, enough to register confusion. He wasn't used to people meeting him with calm. He was used to begging, pleading, panic. I gave him none of that. Just the stillness of someone who'd already rehearsed this scene in their head 100 times, because I had. He glanced at Sandra, who blinked too much. We were hoping you'd sign some materials today, just standard offboarding. I don't sign anything I haven't had legal review, I said, still calm, still polite. Especially when it concerns performance-based compensation tied to legacy agreements. That landed. Sandra scribbled something. Marcus shifted in his chair like his pants were suddenly 2 sizes too tight. Well, we're happy to be collaborative. I smiled the way snakes probably do before they strike. So am I. They thought I'd go quietly. That I'd shuffle out with a cardboard box and a heavy heart. They didn't realize I was already packed. And the paper they just triggered was a landmine they'd forgotten existed. The clause wasn't just a parachute. It was a missile. And they just hit launch. Back in 2013, this company was circling the drain like a flushed wedding ring. We just merged with a competitor that had more lawsuits than customers, and the boardroom smelled like panic and off-brand cologne. Layoffs were daily. Bonuses were dreams. I was one of the few idiots who stuck around not because I believed in the leadership but because I believed in the numbers. And back then, I knew if I could build a model that kept us afloat through 2 consecutive quarters, I'd have leverage. So I did. Me and a whiteboard, 3 thermoses of coffee, and a team of exhausted analysts I bribed with leftover pizza. We stabilized. The bleeding slowed. The merger didn't implode. And when the dust settled, I sat down with the old CFO, a real numbers guy, no fluff, and negotiated a clause that no one thought would ever matter. If I'm terminated without cause, I'd said, sliding the contract across the table, I get 11% of net profits paid within 30 days. He didn't even blink. Done. You've earned it. But off the record, Ethan, if it ever comes to that, this place'll be bankrupt anyway. I signed. He signed. Legal filed it away. Then forgot about it. Everybody did. Fast forward 10 years past 2 restructures, a CEO scandal, a ransomware attack, and the slow rot of upper management replacing competence with charisma. That clause sat like a fossil beneath 1,000 PowerPoint decks, untouched and unedited. Until now. A junior associate in legal, fresh out of Columbia, still believing the truth matters, got tasked with reviewing my bonus eligibility. Just a routine check to see if I'd qualify for partial Q1 incentives. She opened my personnel folder, scrolled, saw a file labeled Merger Contract 2013 Monroe E. She clicked, and stopped breathing halfway down the page. She read it again. 11% of net profits, due upon termination without cause. No asterisks. No expiration. She flagged it for her manager. The manager laughed. No way, that's still valid. She didn't laugh. She pulled up the digital signature logs. Verified timestamps. Cross-referenced merger continuity agreements. Everything held. That's when she called upstairs. By the time the general counsel saw it, the tone in legal had changed from smug amusement to slow, dawning dread. No one had even looked at that clause in a decade. No one remembered to revoke it. And now it was as legally binding as the Wi-Fi password on their office lease. They tried to keep it quiet, but panic doesn't whisper, it leaks. First to compliance, then to finance, then to the CFO's office where Greg skimmed the memo and reportedly muttered, "Shit," loud enough to startle his assistant. Because they knew. They all knew. I wasn't just eligible for a handshake and a thank you email. I was owed a cut of the entire company's profit. And they'd fired me without cause. The silence started in legal. It would spread like a virus from there. CFO Greg Faulkner, a man who wore anxiety like cologne and whose idea of risk management was ignoring it until it screamed, held the memo like it was a prank. "This is outdated," he said, waving it at the general counsel like she'd handed him a menu from a closed restaurant. "This was signed under the old entity. Pre-merger. Different structure. Doesn't apply." The GC didn't flinch. It was never nullified. Carried through via continuity clause. Page 7. Greg squinted at the document like it had personally insulted him. Even if it's technically enforceable, which I doubt, it's symbolic language. No one actually pays clauses like this. That's not a legal argument. she replied. That's a wish. Greg scoffed and shoved the papers onto his desk. We'll send him the standard severance. 2 weeks. Maybe toss in 3 months COBRA if he doesn't make noise. He underestimated one key detail. I'd already hired noise. My attorney, Melina Grant, sharp as piano wire and twice as deadly, had already sent her response by the time Greg tried to downplay it. Attached were 3 things: a clean timestamped PDF of the original contract pulled from a notarized, encrypted archive, a side-by-side comparison of company structural continuity from 2013 to present, annotated by a corporate forensics expert, and a legal brief citing 4 precedent cases where legacy compensation clauses survived mergers and restructures. She closed her email with the number $3,106,488.91. Itemized. Dated. Due within 30 days. Greg read it. Twice. Then tossed his glasses on the desk and muttered something about entitlement culture. What he failed to understand, what they all failed to understand, was that this wasn't entitlement. This was arithmetic. The company's net profit figures were public. The formula was simple. Take the last fiscal report, strip out the fluff, apply the clause. It wasn't an opinion. It was math. Legal confirmed it. Finance tried to stall it. And I waited. Not with fury. Not with desperation. Just with time and receipts. Because I knew men like Greg. Knew their type down to the pores, slick, dismissive, allergic to accountability until it came with a wire transfer deadline. He thought he could spin this into a footnote. Thought maybe a carefully worded email or some corporate doublespeak would spook me into accepting half the amount and walking away. Melina sent back one line. Clock started Monday. Interest accrues monthly. The response? Silence. Then panic in small doses. HR started reviewing other legacy contracts. Compliance pinged legal with a nervous, should we be worried about precedent? Exec assistants began whispering in hallways. I wasn't being unreasonable. They were just realizing that the man they labeled non-essential was suddenly the most expensive oversight they'd ever made. And the clock was ticking. The call came at 7:42 a.m., which told me 2 things. 1, HR was panicking. And 2, they thought catching me before coffee might soften me. It didn't. Hi, Ethan, came the syrupy voice of Meredith, our HR director. Her tone was that fake-friendly mess they teach at HR retreats. Equal parts yoga breath and corporate hostage negotiation. I wanted to see if we could revisit the terms of your, exit arrangement. You mean the legally binding contract your leadership team activated? I asked, stretching in my bathrobe. I wasn't even pretending to be polite anymore. Of course. Let's revisit it. I'd be happy to add 1% interest per overdue month. The pause was delicious. Well, I don't know that interest is. She began, flailing. Standard. I cut in. Neither is firing someone without cause who holds 11% of your net profits in his back pocket, Meredith. Let's not pretend we're negotiating from the same battlefield. She exhaled like she just realized this wasn't going to be a friendly little cleanup job. Can we at least discuss options? We are. The option is, honor the contract. Before that 1% becomes 2. Click. Within hours it leaked. First, to the senior managers, those still shell-shocked from Marcus's non-essential decree. Now whispering in Slack channels with names like Bonus Gate and Monroe Clause. Then to sales, where someone apparently did the math and realized my payout was more than their entire Q1 commission pool combined. By lunchtime, I heard someone from engineering walked into his director's office and said, if Monroe gets 11%, I want hazard pay for enduring 3 years of your JIRA tickets. By end of day, morale didn't just dip. It took a nosedive straight through the building's foundation. Employees weren't angry at me. They were furious at leadership. Because once the clause surfaced, so did the questions. What else was buried? How many more dusty agreements and forgotten clauses were out there? Did this company even know what it owed its people? The exec team scrambled like ants under a kicked rock. HR started proactive reviews of historical contracts, which translated to interns digging through Dropbox folders and begging legal for triage. Sandra, poor thing, had to sit through 3 back-to-back meetings just explaining what a continuity clause even was. Marcus tried to spin it in his weekly company update. Called my clause a legacy anomaly from a previous business context. Said it did not reflect current values or incentive structures. Translation: we didn't think the old guy mattered until he made us bleed. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because the truth was, I hadn't just left with a severance figure. I'd taken something they couldn't track in Excel. I'd taken their narrative. And without it, the whole house of buzzwords was starting to crack. CEO Robert Lasky returned from his 2-week sailing trip in St. Kitts looking tanned, tranquil, and completely unprepared for the flaming bag of legal risk smoldering on his polished mahogany desk. He'd barely set down his Louis Vuitton carry-on before his assistant, Jenna, pale and visibly vibrating, handed him a red folder marked urgent. Not digital. Not Slack. Not email. A physical memo, the way you deliver something that might end a career. The cover sheet read: Subject: Monroe Clause Exposure Risk Profile, $3 million. He stared at it for a beat, then muttered, "Who the hell is Monroe?" 10 minutes later, the board was summoned. Emergency session. No preamble. No catered lunch. Just high-level panic dressed in tailored suits. COO Marcus Holt arrived late, clutching an iced coffee like it was a holy relic. He strutted in, all forced ease and empty confidence, probably still thinking he could charm his way through this like it was a product demo for LinkedIn investors. "Let's all take a breath," Marcus said, flashing that used car grin. "This clause is archaic. Pre-merger. Symbolic. Legal is looking into it, but..." Lasky held up a hand and opened the file. His voice was calm, but each word landed like a brick. Clause 14b. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, Monroe E. shall receive 11% of net profits calculated at the close of the prior fiscal quarter, disbursed within 30 calendar days of said termination. The room went silent. Not tense. Not confused. Silent like the part in a horror movie where the music cuts and you realize you've been walking toward the killer the whole time. Marcus cleared his throat. "It's from the 2013 merger. We assumed." "You assumed," Lasky snapped, folding the memo with surgical precision, "that the one man who carried our operational continuity through 2 economic downturns could be labeled non-essential and cut loose without reading his contract." No one spoke. Across the table, the CFO sat with a face like curdled milk. The GC rubbed her temple so hard it looked like she might bore a hole in her skull. One board member quietly whispered, "3.1 million? 3.1 and change," someone muttered back. "Plus interest if we stall." Lasky leaned back in his chair, suddenly not so tan. "And what's this I hear about employee morale tanking? Slack channels named after him? Clients asking questions?" Marcus swallowed. "It's being addressed." "You will be addressed," the CEO said, voice now colder than a compliance audit. "This isn't just a payout. This is a narrative. A PR disaster in slow motion. You killed the wrong sacred cow." That's when it clicked for the board. I hadn't just triggered a payout clause. I'd activated a pressure point no one knew existed. My silence wasn't retreat, it was presence. It echoed through every empty cubicle, every nervous email, every whispered conversation between execs trying to guess what else I'd buried in that folder. They'd fired a ghost and ended up haunted. And the reckoning had only just begun. 3 days after the board meeting turned into a slow-motion HR crime scene, an envelope arrived via courier at Melina's office. Heavy paper. Thick seal. That kind of ridiculous formal gesture companies use when they want to look serious while begging. Inside, an offer. They were willing to settle. But not the full $3.1 million. Not even close. They offered $1.6 million flat. No interest, with a line about market goodwill and legacy recognition. It came stapled to a non-disclosure agreement so bloated it had its own table of contents. Standard corporate gag order. No public statements, no acknowledgement, no future claims, no breathing the words profit trigger clause to anyone, ever, under penalty of legal obliteration. At the bottom, someone had even handwritten a little note. "Let's move forward amicably." Melina didn't even blink. She slid the envelope back across her desk, tapped the original contract once and said, "We counter with full amount. Public apology optional. We decline the NDA." Their lawyer stammered something about optics and setting precedent, and Melina just smiled like a rattlesnake sunbathing on a porch. You already set precedent, she said. You fired the guy who knew what you owed him. While they scrambled, I was 4 states away, lying on a wooden deck overlooking a lake so still it looked like glass. No phone. No laptop. Just me, a paperback mystery novel, and the sound of geese arguing in the distance. My cabin had no Wi-Fi. No cell service. It wasn't an escape. It was a reminder. I didn't need the noise. They thought I was waiting with bated breath for their response. That I'd be pacing, watching my inbox like a hawk. They had no idea the most dangerous kind of revenge isn't explosive. It's serene. It's knowing you already won and choosing not to gloat because peace tastes better than power. Back at HQ, the PR team started quietly drafting a contingency statement. Something about legacy agreements, regrettable oversights, and commitment to ethical business conduct. They were prepping the world for a possible headline. Former employee receives massive payout after bonus clause ignored. Inside Slack channels, my name was now a noun. Pulling a Monroe, verb 1. To walk away with the bag they forgot existed. Marcus stopped showing up in person. The CEO was having closed-door meetings with legal and comms like they were planning a war that already ended. Meanwhile, I was watching dragonflies skim the surface of a lake, sipping black coffee from a thermos older than most of their middle managers, and feeling, honestly, nothing but closure. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about being remembered by a system designed to forget the people who built it. I didn't burn bridges. I just handed them a map to every detour they'd ignored, and let them drive themselves into the wall. The blowback wasn't loud at first. It started like hairline cracks beneath the surface, barely visible but growing by the second. First came the murmurs. A few Slack screenshots leaked, emails forwarded a little too freely. One senior manager asking in a group chat, "Can someone explain how Nonessential now costs us $3 million? Then came the spark. A mid-level engineer, smart kid from DevOps, never spoke in meetings but saw everything, posted an anonymous Glassdoor review titled, "They called him non-essential. Cost them $3 million. Let that sink in." The post went viral inside 24 hours. Employees screen-capped it. Clients emailed it to their reps. Even a competitor's HR team reposted it in a what not to do training deck. And with that, the dam burst. Morale didn't just drop. It curdled. Workers started asking questions leadership couldn't answer. How many legacy clauses are still active? Do we even know what our contracts say? Is this where our bonuses went? People who once smiled politely on company town halls were now openly roasting Marcus in emoji-stuffed threads. HR tried silencing it with corporate pep talks. We're all one team. But it was like duct taping a leaking submarine. 2 days later, a longtime client suspended their contract, citing leadership instability and legal distraction. Another one followed within hours. Between them, it was nearly $11 million in annual revenue. Then came the internal purge. Marcus Holt was placed on administrative leave. The official line was strategic reassessment. Unofficially, the CEO told the board, he made one mistake too loud to ignore. CFO Greg? Early retirement. The kind that comes with a stiff drink and a confidentiality clause. Rumor has it he tried to pin the whole clause mess on legal, but legal came back with email receipts and a calendar invite titled 2013 Contracts. Monroe Clause Review. Declined. Meanwhile, I was unpacking a box of books back home, finally returning from the lake. Melina texted me a screenshot of the payment confirmation. Subject: Payment complete. Amount: $3,106,488.91. Processed. Immediate disbursement. No apology. No follow-up. Just a cold, calculated wire transfer. Like paying a ransom after realizing the hostage wasn't just alive, but holding the detonator. They thought the clause was the problem, but the clause was never the real threat. The threat was the story it told. That they called me non-essential. That they fired me like I was disposable. That they forgot the one person who never forgot them. And now I was a ghost in their system. A cautionary tale whispered in closed-door meetings and onboarding sessions. A legend carved not in vengeance, but in decimal points and overdue humility. They paid the price. But the loss was bigger than money. The box was exactly where I'd left it. Tucked behind an old filing cabinet in the corner of the garage, Beneath a pile of winter gloves and the original user manual for a printer I threw out in 2014. Sharpie on the lid, faded but legible. Just in case. I carried it to the kitchen like it weighed 50 pounds, even though I knew what was inside. I'd packed it a decade ago in a moment of quiet foresight, back when things still felt salvageable, when I believed the people in charge might eventually remember who kept the floor from falling in. I peeled the lid back and there it was. A manila folder brittle with time, labeled in my own handwriting. Inside, the original printout of Clause 14b, signed in blue ink by me and more importantly, by Charles Langston, the founder. Long retired. Dead now, but once the only executive I ever trusted. His signature curved with intent. No sloppiness, no shortcuts. That was the thing about Langston. When he committed to something, he meant it. He understood people like me didn't need titles or press releases. Just promises kept. I pulled it out, smoothed the page and placed it in a black frame. Not fancy, just enough weight to say this mattered. I centered it on the wall above my desk, then reached into a drawer and pulled out the termination notice Marcus had sent me. The one-line zinger from HR that called me non-essential. Printed on company letterhead like a death certificate. I taped it to the glass, crooked, right beneath the clause so it would always be part of the story. Their words preserved like an artifact. Proof of the arrogance that wrote the check before reading the fine print. Outside, the wind rattled the last dead leaves against the siding. Inside, the house was still. Not empty. Just finished. I wasn't angry anymore. Not bitter. Not even smug. I was done. They erased my name from meeting invites, stripped me from team lists, rewrote roadmaps I'd designed by hand. They thought they were cleaning house. But all they really did was make space for a story. One I got to write. And as I sat down, coffee in hand, the payout process, the inbox silent, and the frame glinting in the morning light, the final thought clicked into place like a switch being flipped. They cut bonuses to save money. Mine just cost them the next quarter.